In 1944, high above the South Pacific, Lieutenant Hank Marlowe, Britain, crash lands on an island with his parachute after his plane goes down. Another soldier, Gunpei Akari Miyavi, also lands on the island. Marlowe draws his firearm on Akari and fires, narrowly missing him. Akari retaliates, pursuing Marlowe as they flee into the forest. They engage in a fierce battle near a cliff, with Akari nearly impaling Marlowe with a sword, but Marlowe manages to deflect the blow. Just as Akari gains the upper hand and is about to finish off Marlowe, a colossal ape hand suddenly emerges, startling them both as they look up to see the massive ape, Terry Notary, looming over them. Fast forward to 1973. In Washington, D.C., government official Bill Randa, John Goodman, and geologist Houston Brooks, Corey Hawkins, arrive for a meeting with Senator Willis, Richard Jenkins, to secure funding for an expedition to a recently discovered location known as Skull Island. Willis initially hesitates, but Randa persuades him to support the mission. Before leaving, Randa also requests a military escort. The Sky Devils Squadron, led by Colonel Preston Packard, Samuel L. Jackson, assembles on their last day before heading home. The squadron includes Captain Earl Cole, Shea Wiggum, Slivko Thomas Mann, Relis, Eugene Cordero, Glenn Mills, Jason Mitchell, and Jack Chapman, Toby Kebbell, who serves as Packard's right-hand man. When the call for the expedition arrives, Packard eagerly accepts the job. Randa and Brooks visit a bar and encounter James Conrad, Tom Hiddleston, a former British Special Air Service captain, whom they want to recruit as their tracker. Conrad effortlessly handles two bar patrons who accuse him of cheating at pool, leaving Randa impressed and convinced that they've found their guide. Conrad joins Randa and Brooks to hear their plan, but he insists on higher compensation and points out the substantial risks associated with severe weather conditions and predatory creatures. In a darkroom, anti-war photographer Mason Weaver, Brie Larson, develops photos she took during the Vietnam conflict. She receives an invitation to join the expedition and arrives at the base to meet with Packard, his men, and a team of scientists from the company Landsat, including Brooks' fellow geologist San Lin, Tian Jing, and Landsat employees Victor Nieves, John Ortiz, and Steve Mark Evan Jackson. Weaver has reservations about the mission and suspects that the military has ulterior motives. Brooks explains the mission's objectives and what they hope to discover on Skull Island. The team embarks on a voyage across the ocean, using helicopters to reach the island. They encounter turbulent conditions caused by storm clouds, but manage to find a high-pressure pocket that appears to be a safer route. Despite a harrowing flight through the storm, the helicopters enter the island's airspace. As they drop seismic charges into the ground to trigger explosions, disaster strikes when Kong emerges. He hurls a tree through one of the helicopters, sending it crashing down. Survivors are scattered as they hit the ground, and amidst the flames from the wreckage, Packard and his men find themselves staring up at Kong, who gazes back down at them. Packard confronts Randa at gunpoint and demands the truth about their real purpose on the island. Randa confesses that he had knowledge of the existence of creatures like Kong and sought evidence for his organization, Monarch. Conrad, Weaver, Brooks, Lynn, Slivko, and Nieves group together, while Randa, Packard, Mills, Cole, and other soldiers venture out to locate Chapman, who possesses ample ammunition that Packard intends to use against Kong. As they navigate a bamboo forest, they encounter a deadly giant spider that attacks them. Mills is ensnared in its web, and the soldiers fight back by severing its legs. Mills manages to free himself, and Packard ultimately dispatches the spider. Meanwhile, Chapman finds himself near a river, where he observes Kong wading through the water to tend to a wound inflicted by the helicopter's gunfire. Kong takes a drink from the river and then encounters a massive octopus, engaging in a fierce battle with it, fending off its tentacles before devouring it and dragging the carcass away. Conrad's party finds themselves trapped by a tribe of natives. While attempting to defend themselves, an older Marlowe, now portrayed by John C. Reilly, emerges. He reassures both groups that they pose no threat to one another and invites Conrad's group to pass through the barrier. Marlowe shares that he has spent the last 28 years on the island and has gained extensive knowledge about the natives and the island itself. The natives hold Kong in high regard as a protector against subterranean creatures known as skull crawlers that have been threatening the island and its inhabitants for centuries. Marlowe reveals that the recent seismic charges have awakened these creatures, and if anything happens to Kong, the skull crawlers will take over the island. He also hints at the existence of a much larger skull crawler. Chapman, separated from the group, ventures through the forest and encounters a massive insect, which he shoots at without provocation. Surprisingly, the creature doesn't retaliate, but as it departs, Chapman falls victim to a skull crawler. Conrad informs Marlowe of their plan to reach their rendezvous point on the north side of the island within 3 days for rescue. Marlowe, however, believes it's impossible to reach it by foot in such a short time and agrees to guide them. After bidding farewell to the natives, he leads the group on a boat. Unfortunately, shortly after departing, Nieves is abducted and killed by carnivorous birds. While en route, Weaver spots a massive water buffalo trapped beneath a downed helicopter. She attempts to free the buffalo, but Kong arrives and effortlessly removes the helicopter. Kong briefly gazes at Weaver before leaving her more in awe than terrified. Marlowe leads the group into a treacherous area known as the Forbidden Zone, where Kong's ancestors battled the skull crawlers. The colossal remains of Kong's family litter the field. A skull crawler emerges, forcing the group to hide. The skull crawler regurgitates Chapman's dog tags, catching Conrad's attention. Packard and his men arrive in the same vicinity. Randa is seized and devoured by a skull crawler, and another one joins the attack, using its tongue to snatch victims. The groups engage in a fierce battle against the skull crawlers and the carnivorous birds. Marlowe wields a Kari sword, slashing through the birds before passing it to Conrad. Weaver cleverly kills one of the creatures by igniting fumes with a lighter, setting it ablaze. Following the fight, the survivors regroup. Packard remains determined to locate Chapman, but Conrad presents Chapman's dog tags as evidence of his death. Despite objections from Marlowe, Conrad, and Weaver, Packard is intent on avenging his fallen men and hunting Kong. That night, Packard sets a trap for Kong, while Conrad and Weaver encounter the giant ape. Weaver cautiously approaches Kong and touches his face, finding him surprisingly gentle. However, Packard lures Kong toward him and ignites the fuel, causing burns on Kong's fur. Kong reacts by stomping on Steve and another soldier before collapsing. Packard prepares to detonate explosives, but Conrad and Weaver intervene, convincing the other soldiers that they need Kong to protect against the skull crawlers. A colossal skull crawler emerges, forcing the group to flee. Packard stays behind to trigger the explosives, but Kong crushes him with his fist. The survivors head toward the shore as the main skull crawler pursues them. Cole decides to sacrifice himself with explosive devices strapped to him, but the monster tail whips him into a wall, causing an explosion. The skull crawler continues to pursue the group until Kong returns, smashing into the beast. Using a ship's propeller attached to an anchor chain, Kong mortally wounds the creature by slashing its throat. However, it remains alive and attacks again. Weaver hits it in the face with a flare gun. Kong grabs the skull crawler, hurls it into the wall, and accidentally knocks Weaver into the river. He retrieves Weaver and defeats the skull crawler by thrusting his fist down its throat and pulling out its entrails. Kong places Weaver next to Conrad before departing. Finally, the survivors, Conrad, Weaver, Marlowe, Brooks, Lynn, Mills, Slivko, and Relis, leave the island on a boat, with 3 helicopters arriving to pick them up. In the distance, Kong remains vigilant, guarding his territory and letting out a mighty roar. As the credits roll, we witness Marlowe's long-awaited return to his home in Chicago. There, he is reunited with his wife and has a heartwarming encounter with his grown-up son. Marlowe then settles in, enjoying a classic Cubs baseball game accompanied by a hot dog and a refreshing beer. Following the credits, Conrad and Weaver find themselves in an interrogation room, under the watchful eyes of the Monarch organization. Stepping into the room are Brooks and Lynn, who convey a startling revelation to the pair. They disclose that Kong was not the sole titan in this world, and that humanity was not always its dominant force. Brooks proceeds to reveal a collection of files, including a map of Tokyo, and initiates a compelling slideshow presentation. The slides showcase another expedition team discovering ancient cave drawings, depicting formidable creatures such as Mothra, King Ghidorah, Rodan, and the legendary Godzilla himself. The sequence concludes with a resounding symphony of roars, as Kong and Godzilla make their presence felt in unison.
how cold